Hi, thanks for joining me. I am really excited about this next guest. Her name is Natalie Huber Rodriguez, and she reached out to me because she wanted to talk about the LGBTQ plus community in the Native American culture. And this interests me for several different reasons. First, the reason why it interests me is because me and my aunt, which you would have heard on a previous earlier podcast when the podcast first started, I think it was season one, where we both did DNA tests at the same time during COVID. And we learned a lot about our family. And the reason why we did these DNA tests is because we were told growing up, both of us, that we were both part Native American. And I will say that my grandfather, my father's father, and her father, my aunt's father, did look like he had the features of a Native American. And we just thought that was sure. I don't feel like I have any features of a Native American, and I don't think my aunt really does either. And so when we did this DNA test, we found out something interesting. We found out that my grandfather was not really my aunt's father. And we did 23andMe first, and then we did Ancestry to confirm. And I had cousins coming up on my side for the Randall side, and she didn't have any of these cousins, and there were people who she didn't know. And so it didn't make sense. But she learned this in her 60s that her father that she grew up with was not her biological father. And now that both of her parents or my grandparents are both dead, we don't have any way to really find out more information unless she decided to go out and reach out to some of these people that are coming up in her 23andMe or Ancestry profile as cousins or whatever. And she's not interested in doing it. She's 69 years old and she's not interested in it anymore. But I think that was one of the reasons why, because I still feel a connection to um, the Native American culture because I still somehow think my grandfather is part of that. And I think it's really interesting just how, they've been around, for so long and with an LGBTQ community in them because they have a thing called Two Spirit. And you have to just listen to the episode to learn more. I didn't really I've never heard of Two Spirit until I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, during Pride Month, there was a sign that came up, for a promotion in New York City for New York City Pride where it had, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, all the different ones, and then they had Two Spirit, and I had to Google what Two Spirit was because I didn't even know what it was. And it's part of the Native American culture, a two-spirit person is. So it's Google it if you don't understand it after you talk with Natalie, but I think it's fascinating that two-spirit has been around, for a very, very long time. So it's fascinating to me. I think Natalie was a fascinating, interview, and I just love the fact that she wanted to come on and just really kind of talk about the LGBTQ plus community in the Native American world. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please be sure to leave a comment, and thanks so much for listening. Hi, thanks for joining me on the Everything and Anything and a Bit Gay podcast. Today I have Natalie Huber Rodriguez joining my show. She is living in the UK, but from the United States and is a Native American the right terminology to say, or
Yes, that's perfectly fine. A lot of us have different preferences. Some people have really strong feelings about not using certain words such as Indian, American Indian, Native American.
yeah,
Some of us prefer, though, to these days just kind of go by our tribal names because our tribes and cultures are as varied and diverse as pretty much any other country is from any other one,
yeah,
all the countries across Europe, the US, everywhere. So I like to say, yes, I am Taino. I am of the Taino nation of the Caribbean. We are the indigenous inhabitants of the Greater Antilles, essentially. So, what is modern day Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Haiti, and also South Florida. Um, and we have very big communities throughout the United States through immigration, particularly in areas
Mhm.
of New York that have a big population of immigrants from the Caribbean. But yes,
Okay.
for in terms of the greater context, you can say we're part of the Native community or the Indigenous American community.
So I know about Two Spirit because I'm part of the LGBTQ plus
Right.
community. I think I did maybe a podcast a year or two ago, just about the different types of people that fall within LGBTQ plus. And during Pride year, one year in New York, they had a sign, and this is where I learned about what Two Spirit was because they had a sign on one of the streets
Uh-huh.
listing all like what LGBTQ plus, but then they went further and they started listing Two Spirit and they started listing other things. So I had to look it up to see what Two Spirit was because I never heard of it. So can you tell listeners that are listening that may not know what Two Spirit is, what that
Sure.
means?
So, Two Spirit is a modern term in of itself. What it symbolizes and what it kind of encompasses nowadays is obviously far more ancient within various indigenous cultures, but the term Two Spirit is relatively new. And I should also say, just for the record, that some people don't like the term. They find it a bit too binary and a bit too colonial as well, which I understand and is valid. What it has become in terms of when, like you said, you've seen it in use at Pride and other event, any LGBTQ plus events. It's basically a sort of, we call it pan-Indian, meaning kind of across all tribes and cultures who are indigenous to the Americas term that can refer pretty much to anybody of the LGBTQ plus community who is indigenous American.
Okay.
So that can range from anything from somebody who's just homosexual male to trans to non-binary to genderqueer. It really can vary. And I should also point out, because again, tribes are so diverse and our cultures are so diverse, while we have a lot of commonalities among us in terms of how we view things like gender and sexuality, it does vary
Mhm.
slightly. So some tribes may say, for example, prefer to use their own terms for people who we may generalize as Two Spirit. And I can give you an example here. So, personally in the Taino language, in the Hiwatahia Taino language, which is our kind of resurrected language that we've pieced
Mhm.
together after hundreds and years of colonization, we say biwaisa for a Two Spirit person. And then we also have another term, kiwari, which is just kind of more generally LGBTQ. But within the Two Spirit community, everybody who I know who identifies as Two Spirit is very happy and proud to do so. They hold great status and great recognition in a lot of cultures and tribes, have a huge presence at cultural events such as powwows and other culturally significant ceremonies. And even among particular tribes, people historically who would be classed as Two Spirit today, obviously prior to that terminology, even held special status in some cases because they were considered kind of more powerful in ways that more heteronormative people were not.
And so they could be a man that's just a gay homosexual man.
Yes.
It could be a lesbian. It could be anything in the LGBTQ plus community. But because they're in, they're part of your community, then that's kind of what we would call two
Right.
spirit,
Two
quote unquote.
spirit, the term two spirit kind of comes mainly to just differentiate indigenous LGBTQ plus folks from
Got it.
non-indigenous LGBTQ plus folks. But that isn't to say that an indigenous person could choose not to identify as two spirit. They may, like I say, prefer the term. They might just like to say, no, I'm gay or I'm trans, etc. Like I said, some people do find that term a bit too simplistic and a bit too binary or too colonial again, because it did come around in sort of this new age concept. And also, we do have to remember that the Western concept of gender and sexuality is quite different from the Indigenous concept in a lot of ways too. So
Yeah, so tell me about that. Tell me, like, some of the
yeah,
differences.
so I really think it's quite fascinating, and it's one of the things that one of my people in my Yukayeke, my tribal community, was telling me was that gender and sexuality were much more fluid and much more open. It wasn't. I mean, yes, obviously for procreation you need you need two types of bodies
Yeah,
and two
yeah,
types of parts, but um, the idea of love and who you decided to engage with sexually or how you decided to identify yourself was just not really ever, I guess, an issue in the same way it was in Western culture, even in terms of things like dress and the way you were supposed to act or the way you're supposed to wear your hair or your appearance. In Taino culture specifically, a lot of us didn't wear a whole lot of clothes back then in general. So
yeah,
bodies weren't really as taboo, and what people had between their legs and under their
yeah.
clothes.
It sounds a lot more freeing than what we have today, if to be
I
honest.
agree. It was quite fluid, and it was quite, again, it wasn't as categorized, I think, as it was today, and there just wasn't as much of a focus on it. Yes, there were some things that were more associated with female energy, male energy, or some tasks maybe designated more towards females, males, such as like things like warfare, obviously going into battle, or things more pertaining to maybe minding a home or a household that tended to fall maybe more towards like gender norms. But even then, there was so much blurring, even in that sense. Children were raised by the whole community, men and women. It wasn't just up to one gender really to do that. In terms of warfare, even funny enough, in some cultures, some indigenous cultures, women, if there weren't enough, say, sons in a family, some women were chosen to be raised as or essentially live as men so that they could have more, bodies in war, or more soldiers, essentially, more warriors on a battlefield, strength in numbers. These were, at least in the Crow culture, they were called many-hearted women. And so sometimes it came out of necessity, sometimes it came out of just that's how some people were. It was never scrutinized, I don't think, in the way it was by Western culture. And even when colonization did happen, I think that was one of the things that was really difficult for non-Indigenous people to understand, and vice versa. This idea that women and men there was like this more separation, and anything masculine was here and anything feminine was here, and then nary the two shall mix kind of thing.
And is this common across other communities or just your community?
No, it's quite common across many communities. Are you familiar with the actress Lily Gladstone?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, yes.
she is a Indigenous person. She is of the Paigan Blackfeet Nation, but she is also identifies as Two Spirit, and her pronouns are she, her, but also they, them. And the way she explained it once, which I thought was really fascinating, when people asked her more about that, about her sexuality and gender identity, she said, in the Blackfeet language, we don't have gender pronouns. We never did. We only had they, them. We only had like you, me. Like there was no he,
Yeah,
she, his, her. So to me, that whole concept itself is quite new. And those of us who have been in this community and passed on these teachings and these traditions for thousands of years, it is still quite new to us. And so her explanation of that was, not only is it obviously how she prefers to identify, and it's truer to her identity in terms of her sexuality and gender, but also she felt it as a way of sort of reclaiming her indigeneity and kind of a sort of pushback against colonization in that way, to say, no, I don't have to fall into your heteronormative gender pronouns, because we never used them and we got
yeah.
along just fine. So
So is there any homophobia though in any of the in
of
there
course,
is?
yes. I'm sorry to say, it would be amazing to say, no, everybody was great and loved each other, and fully accepted everybody of varying sexualities and gender identities. Obviously, I don't think, unfortunately, that's true in any culture. I really wish it were.
Yeah.
Hopefully, one day. But yes, of course, there's been, and it was, I mean, a lot of it, I do think we can say it definitely became more prevalent post colonization once those attitudes, those sort of homophobic attitudes started coming along more, as particularly
Mhm,
with the introduction of Christianity and
mhm.
forced conversion of Christianity and the ideas associated with it then. Um, but I have even read like that there have been instances of in the past such individuals who were considered true spirit. Again, this varies so much between tribes and between um, cultures that it really can't be generalized. But they were often sometimes mocked and ridiculed. Particularly, I remember reading about the Lakota people known as the Winkte. That was basically essentially the term for gay men or even just effeminate men. And from what I've read and what research shows, and even from what I've heard from people of the Lakota community, attitudes kind of were very diverse. They ranged all the way from completely ambivalent sometimes, whereas they were considered no different from anybody else in the community, other than they sleep with other men or they act more effeminate in one way or the other, and
Mhm.
that's fine. But then there was also, of course, anything I feel like that makes somebody different in some ways could make them a target for ridicule. And they said yes, that there would definitely sometimes be some kind of prejudice or mocking of such individuals in those communities as well. So it really is kind of a diverse spectrum in that sense. But again, that varies so much. I'm happy to say that in our culture, at least in Taino specific, in terms of the Neo Taino movement, we are very LGBTQ friendly and open. We have lots of such individuals in our community. That isn't to say, though, I haven't known, unfortunately, some Taino people
Yeah,
who do have more homophobic attitudes. And again, I do feel
yeah,
like a lot of it relates to this a lot of them do tend to be Catholic as well because of the Latin American
yep,
background, and I do think a lot of that is intertwined and just so ingrained through colonization. It is hard to break out of.
yeah. So if Europe didn't come over to the United States, it would have been a whole different
I do wonder
thing,
about that. I really do. Yeah,
yeah,
it was just I, I do think, like I said, I do think the concept was made to be more something more negative through these Christian views and through just kind of European ideas of sex and
yeah,
gender and what a man should be, what a man shouldn't be, what a woman should and shouldn't be. Unfortunately, after hundreds and hundreds of years of colonization, ingraining those ideas into the indigenous society and forcing it upon our ancestors, quite honestly,
yeah,
without our consent. It's hard to decolonize even that, as we say. Every day we are working to decolonize things that were forced upon us, and I would say, in a lot of ways, that is one of them as well.
yeah. I grew up in Miami, so
Oh,
I was around I had a very strong kind of, Latin culture,
mhm. So you know,
best friend was my best friend was
yep,
Cuban,
that's what I am as well.
uh oh, you are? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So, his family was very accepting of it, he lived in, Little Havana in
Mhm.
Miami,
Got a lot
and
of family there.
the Cuban cultures and the Puerto Rican culture both are, I guess, really any Latin culture and the Haitian community as well. Some of the men are very, it's the
Mhm.
macho
Machismo.
guy. Yeah, exactly. And so my best friend Tony was lucky that his entire family accepted it, and he was there. But I can see where being part of that Caribbean or South Florida culture, where there could be kind of homophobia, kind of that's brought in, especially as just that's just how their culture is, because there is a lot. I mean, his mother is very religious.
Mhm. Yeah.
We're lucky that she's 90 years old still, and she has 2 grandchildren from him too.
We live a long time. My husband says the same thing. He's like, "Cubans just live forever." I feel
Yeah, yeah,
like
and they have a big Saint Lazarus
Oh,
in front of
good,
their
yep.
house and everything. And so they are, religious. My friend Tony is not religious, but his mother is religious, and so luckily enough, she was
Yeah,
accepting of all of this,
which
so
is great, and even that's a thing, like, in a lot of Indigenous communities, and ours as well, there is sort of even, like, some divide among us on that too, because everybody say, "Oh, Christianity is colonization, we shouldn't why
Mhm.
should we support a religion that basically, um, oppressed us essentially or forced
Yeah.
us?" And that is fair, but at the same time, people's faith is important to them, and I do get that, and if people and their families have been following the Christian faith for however long, and they feel they want to stay connected to that faith. I am all for that as long as it's done in the good, true, loving, and accepting Christian way, and not obviously oppressing or holding prejudice against anyone else. But we do, I've seen just in the Native community a lot of kind of back and forth on that too. We do even have something called the Native American Church, which is like the weirdest concept,
Mm.
obviously. It almost sounds like a paradox in of itself, but it was basically designed by natives for natives to help the, I guess, conversion process, I guess, be a little more easy to undergo as an indigenous person in the Americas.
Okay.
And particularly, as you'll probably know, growing up in Miami, there's a lot of what we call syncretic religions, which are like sort of blending of Christianity, particularly Catholic Christianity, with more indigenous traditions. So I'm sure in Miami, I know I've seen it everywhere. You've probably heard of and seen iconography for Santeria,
Oh, yeah, for
things
sure,
like that.
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It scares me actually a little bit,
I
so
know. Or yeah, my great aunt was a big is I think
yeah.
she still is. She says she's not, but um,
Yeah, well, my friend Tony, I think his mother, he calls her a witch because there's
bruja.
something. Yes, exactly. So,
Yeah, see,
y
that's one
yeah.
of those examples because when you look at that, I mean, that yes, they use a lot of iconography of the Catholic saints and
Mhm,
of, Jesus and everything, but then there are so many things that if you break it down and having studied, anthropology and folklore like I did, right away, I'm like, right, this is not Christian. This comes from indigenous and even
mhm,
sometimes African ancestry for African ancestors who were brought over during the slave trade. So a blend of their kind of folk religion and traditional beliefs, and then it sort of became this kind of new, very different, very unique thing. But the reason those types of practices do exist, syncretic practices such as Santeria, such as even voodoo and candomblé, especially among the Latin American communities, was because we had so many belief systems from the Catholic, conquistadors, plus our indigenous traditions, plus the African traditions, and it all just sort of blended together. And it was a lot easier, particularly for the Spaniards, to convert people if it was something that they could digest more easily and recognize more easily. So that's why they started. There was with these syncretic traditions. There's a lot of practice of equating certain saints with certain spirits or gods or
mhm,
certain ancient entities, ancient deities. And as long as you look like you're praying to the right people, usually it's fine.
yeah,
And I always thought that that was a really brilliant and innovative way for our people to kind of keep our own traditions while still surviving, because a lot of the time it was if you don't convert, you're dead. So we'll
yeah,
say, okay, I'll pray to your God or your saint or your this, but in my mind, he's Atabe or he's Yukahu or but if you want to call him
yeah.
this, I just think they'll will think it's like I say a different manifestation of that same spirit. So I always found that really fascinating, and just one of the amazing things that came out of obviously colonization itself was a horrible thing for in pretty much every other way, but it really that I think is a beautiful thing that came out of it.
Do you have, is your community in Cuba, and would you ever wanna go to Cuba?
I have been several times, yes. I still have some family there. A lot of relatives have immigrated, of course, and mostly live in the Miami area as well.
Yeah,
Also, parts of New York, North Jersey, etc. But yeah, I've been to Cuba several times, and yes, there is a whole community of people of Taino descent, or who still practice and live in many ways very similarly to the way they used to in terms of their agricultural practices and cooking practices, food preparation, spiritual traditions. It's in an area called Caridad de los Indios, which is out in eastern Cuba. And it's huge, multiple large extended families that all kind of have just been in this same area for hundreds and hundreds of years and maintained their culture and their kind of ethnicity as well. There's been a lot less for them, a lot less admixing like there has been for the rest of us with admixing into the other communities around us. I would love to go back. It's been difficult, obviously, with the pandemic and then everything afterwards. Traveling
Yeah.
to Cuba, particularly from the US, is still quite hard, unfortunately.
I would love to go to Cuba. It's been on my
Yeah,
list for so long. I have family. I have an aunt that or a cousin that went, and they ended up going to a family's house to have dinner that like they didn't have a they wasn't like a typical restaurant that people would have serve food out of their house, and they went and they just said it was just an amazing. Everybody was just so friendly. It was so nice, and it's just beautiful.
yeah. We are a very hospitable, I would say, people in general. And I believe a lot of that does come from our indigenous ancestry and the people of the Caridad de los Indios. The main clan there is called the Roja Romero clan. And we have a cacique, which is a chief. His name is Panchito. He's quite old as well. I want to say he's got to be in his 90s. But another scholar from the Taino community has written a whole book about him. There's been a lot of books written about him and the Taino community in general down there, and just how much they've been able to preserve in light of everything, in light of through it all, through colonization, through the revolution, through all of it. It's still very much preserved in the ways of the ancestors, which I think is quite amazing. And yes, I would absolutely go back anytime if it was more feasible to do so, and would love to go back. I'm friends with on Facebook with some of the people of that area still, the Roja Romero clan, and they, obviously it's a bit harder for them to communicate digitally with
Yeah.
the way things are in Cuba. But whenever I do hear from them and I see the pictures they post and the videos they post of their ceremonies and their get-togethers and everything they do, it's just absolutely amazing. And I've been invited many, many times to come back. They're like, "Oh, when are you coming back around?"
Yeah.
Like, hermana, sister, like, come, come, come.
So there's a lot of history here, right? Like there with Two Spirit, with LGBTQ plus whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of history there. Why do you think it's important to kind of keep that visible? Do you think like the Western world is kind of almost not paying attention to this any longer, or that it's kind of being phased out in some ways, and there's just so many other things that people are talking about? I mean,
I'm happy to say I think, honestly, I don't think it's being phased out. I think it's being given more recognition than it's been in the past, which is good because for a while, Taino people were considered extinct, even up
wow.
until relatively recently. It was written in all the history books everywhere that we were extinct. There was absolutely nobody left with any Taino blood, no remnants of the culture and of the heritage, which was really odd, especially when I remember it had the moment when I was in school in seventh grade and reading that, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's what abuela is. Abuela is Taino. She always says
Yeah.
she's Taino. Like we are Taino. I know we're Taino.
Yeah.
And so how can I'm sitting here reading something saying like that our culture and all people are extinct, and I'm like, I know plenty of people who are proudly Taino and keep up the traditions, keep up the customs. Like I said, we've just spent a lot of time and resources reconstructing our language that had been pretty much dead and buried, or considered on the books at least dead and
Mhm.
buried for hundreds of years through a lot of scholarly and linguistic research. We have, like I said, in my community, we have caciques, we have chiefs, we have people who hold special status as healers, as storytellers, as keepers of tradition. And this is all thanks to our resilience and our indominance. And I do think, obviously, that is something that is always important. That is something that should never go away. It's always important to remember who you are and where you came from, especially if you are from a group that was the victim of cultural oppression, cultural subjugation, which we were. So I think we've made huge strides in that in just even within my lifetime alone, seeing us go from extinct. I've literally seen the Wikipedia page change in my lifetime alone to
Wow,
say,
that's pretty
this,
amazing.
I know. It blew my mind one day when it was just like, I was like, everything says extinct, extinct. And then when I went and looked back, it said, previously thought to be extinct. However, there are now communities in Puerto Rico and Cuba and in the Dominican Republic, etc. And I was like, see, look, they've actually listened to us. They have, when we, we can, as you probably know, we can be very loud people. And when somebody told us or somebody heard that people were saying we were extinct, we very loudly stood up and said, no, we are not. We are here. And I also think the lessons that we can bring in regard to certain attitudes, like towards LGBTQ individuals, towards this, non-heteronormative, non-binary kind of way of thinking about gender and sexuality, I think are especially important nowadays for what I think are obvious reasons, is this idea of acceptance, of just allowing people to be who they are. Like I said, how I started off, it was never really even a thing for us. It was
Yeah,
just people who were who they were and they loved who they loved, and it was never
didn't
even
matter.
given a second thought. Yeah, exactly.
I'll just tell you an interesting story that growing up my entire life, as I was a child, we were told that my grandfather was 3/4 or half Cherokee Indian,
Cherokee, well, yeah, lots of Cherokee people. They married.
and he did have, the skin tone and stuff, and there was he had stories about his parents, and I guess would be my great-grandparents.
Hmm.
And so me and my aunt during COVID decided, like, I don't have any features of Cherokee at all. I think my grandfather did. My father, I think, did in some ways. So what me and my aunt decided to do is to do a DNA test at
And we're
23andMe or Ancestry.com. So I did the I we both did Ancestry. No, we did 23andMe first, and it came back, and there was nothing, no Native American, nothing in our thing. And so I'm like, let's do Ancestry, because my uncle, her brother, said that he got it and he was actually going to change his nationality in the United States government to be Native American. Because he did this DNA test years ago before this all became popular, and it said that he was. So I'm like, isn't this odd that we're not though? Like something is weird because I should at least be a quarter or an eighth or something. I should have something. It was all British and Irish, and there was a little bit of Spain, but it was all European. Nothing was Native American at all. So I neither was my aunt. But then my aunt and I started looking at our DNA to see who we were related to, and she didn't have I had all these people with my last name, which is Randalls, that I was kind of related that I had coming popping up, and she didn't have any. So we found out through this DNA test, not only were we had no native, community in us at all, but her father, which is my grandfather, was not even her real father.
oh goodness, yeah. You never know what you'll find with those things, right? Oh my God.
Yeah, so she was 65 years old and found out that the father that she had her whole life was not even her biological father, so
Yeah, I mean, I will say just those DNA tests are a bit controversial in the Indigenous community as well, because you can't get tribal affiliation or tribal status through DNA alone. At least in the US, for federally recognized tribes, you do have to kind of have some sort of like documentary evidence, as opposed to just saying, yeah, here I took this test, here's my percentage or something. So that being one thing, but also in terms of how accurate they are, it's hard to say. I think they're like again, having studied anthropology and genetics, it's easier obviously for people of European backgrounds to get more accurate results for that, because they go by a reference selection of people they've
yeah.
tested on before. And it's a lot easier to have a reference selection of people of European backgrounds than of Indigenous backgrounds, because Indigenous people are, first of all, we're far fewer in terms of population.
Yep.
and far less likely to take those kind of tests. So, or to put our DNA into the pool sample for it to be used in that sense. So in terms of their accuracy, it's really, I'm not even sure quite how I feel about it. I worked for National Geographic and we did something similar. And I remember I did mine just because it was free and we were doing it. I was working there. I said I might as well. And it was pretty much what I expected in terms of, I'm like, right, okay, there's the Indigenous heritage. There's the Spanish in there as well. Dad's side, very, very, very great British Isles,
Yeah.
European, some German as well. So I will say with those, kind of take them with a grain of salt. You may still very well have some or have a Cherokee ancestor. It could be just by the time it was so far back enough that it wasn't enough to show up in those results. That's another thing that doesn't it has to be within a certain generation back for that DNA to be able to pull through to a tangible percentage. So even if it was, say, 1 or 2 more generations back than you thought it would, it wouldn't necessarily come up. But
That is
does it?
so interesting. It makes sense.
Yeah, again, genetics can only tell you so much and go so far back. So I do always caution people with those things, particularly in countries like in the United States, where we are a nation of immigrants, more or less, unless you are Indigenous. Some people want kind of this sense to know where they came from and their
Yeah.
cultural heritage. And my husband, who's Scottish, laughs about it all the time. He's like, only Americans do that. That's not a thing here. We know we're Scottish. We know we're this. We know we're
Yeah.
that. But it is, I do think, because, we are a nation of a very admixed population, and we want to know our deeper cultural heritage. So I'm sorry if that was very disappointing to find out you were Cherokee, or at least that your DNA results didn't say you were
Yeah.
Cherokee. But again, that does not mean there was not somebody who was Cherokee in your line. And I will
That makes
tell
me
you,
feel a lot better because my grandfather definitely has the features, and he had the skin tone, and so did my father. So that's why I was just so surprised. And I know that I have cousins that have the same last name that showed up, so I know that that's my family. I know I wasn't, adopted or something, but my aunt did find
uh,
I mean, my aunt has
your
no
aunt was
connection.
adopted.
My grandmother basically had an affair with
Oh,
someone, and my aunt could actually she has some cousins that are now showing up
mhm.
that she could reach out to and probably find out who her father was, but she has no desire to do it now.
Yeah, which is fair. I get that. I mean, it must
I
have
mean,
been,
he's most likely dead anyway, or if not, he'd be 100 years old.
yeah.
But she just, doesn't care. She says the father that raised her is her father.
Which is perfectly valid as well.
Yeah.
I found out too through when I was researching my family history records that my grandmother was raised by the people she thought were her parents were actually her grandparents, and the woman she thought was her older sister was her biological mother. Because, yeah, that's how it was back in the day. Her biological mother, was about 16, got pregnant out of wedlock, and of course that was a big no-no back
Yeah.
then. So she kind of just quietly had the baby, turned it over to her parents, and then the whole narrative throughout my grandmother's life, all of her, and the life and death of her parents,
Mhm.
mother, everybody, was that was her older sister, and those were her parents. And then it didn't come out. She didn't find out until she was much older herself. And then I, of course, didn't find out until I was looking through our records, and I was like, wait, who are these people that are coming up? So it is kind of crazy what you can
It's a
find
slippery
through that.
slope with DNA tests, but
Yeah.
another a good story is that my good friend in college did a DNA test and and she was adopted and just found her real mother, her real father, and her grandmother, and she has a sister that looks exactly like her.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, see, those things, I mean, that's the thing. They're really a double-edged sword sometimes,
They
or
are.
they can be beneficial, but then you might find some things maybe you didn't want to know. Um, can have been used in solving crimes, which is
Yeah.
great. But then on other side of that coin is some people say, oh, now my DNA is out there and could be used maliciously, etc.
Yeah.
So they are, people have a lot of feelings about them. But I do say, like I say, take them with a grain of salt. They're not 100% to the T, and they only can rely on so much information that they have. And again, they can only go back so far,
Yeah.
really. And even things like what you're saying, the features or what you look like, that doesn't really necessarily mean anything either. Sometimes some people can, my brother who has just as much indigenous blood as I am, has very blue eyes and
Yeah.
and is tall and thin and freckled. And it's just genetics are so
Yeah.
weird that way. I have known natives of all people who are part of the native community of all skin tones and colors and eye colors and physical appearance. It really doesn't come into, yes, we have this idea in our head of traditionally what we think, but because of so many years of colonization and intermarrying and even between tribes, even between countries, etc., we do have a much more admixed population in general. And in my opinion, nobody's 100% really anything anymore.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even people who like to claim they are. And the Cherokee, I will tell you, almost everybody, it's kind of a common joke even among the indigenous community now, is like if they say every white person you meet in America says, you know what, there's a story in my family about a Cherokee great-great-great-grandmother or something.
Yeah.
And we have a few theories on that. And one is that I have some friends who are Cherokee, and she's like, well, we, unlike a lot of other tribes, we intermarried everybody. We adopted everybody, which is true. That's why the Cherokee are one of, by population, the biggest tribe under federal, with the biggest
Yeah.
population in the United States, because they did really they took anybody. There was a lot of adoption. There was a lot of intermarrying. You technically only need, I think, 1/16 of your heritage needs to be Cherokee to officially classify yourself as Cherokee. So they are a big group, and they are a very inclusive group in that sense. They were more widespread and had no problems with marrying outside of their race and outside of their tribe and culture.
Yeah.
They married escaped slaves. They married everybody. So that's one theory. But then other people like to say, oh, well, nobody used to say that back in the day, because back in the day you would hide something like that because if it could be a source for prejudice if people realize you had even one drop of non-white blood in you. But now they feel that now, because those attitudes have shifted and changed so dramatically, which is for the best, obviously.
Yeah.
Now people who previously maybe their families may have hidden something like that really want to embrace it and want to learn more about it and everything. And I'm all for that, obviously. If it's something that's been a narrative of your family, there's probably something to it somewhere, and I'm all for going and looking further into it. Like you said, it could just be there wasn't anything there. It was just a story because he happened to look this way, and it makes for a great story, like we were saying.
Well, it's funny that my grandmother and my grandfather grew up, and they had I think my grandmother's mother would show her all these ancient things that she could use to make, if you had a fever, she'd go out and get this
Right.
certain or all these great things that I
Sure.
wish that my grandmother would have written down, because
Definitely.
I just, it's so amazing, like just kind of going back to the earth and being able to do certain things and not have to depend on such Western medicines and stuff like that. So
Absolutely. And that's another thing I think part of why it's important to recognize and learn about and embrace Indigenous culture today is for these really great values and
mhm,
lessons and just kind of entirely different ways of life that the Western world can learn from us and from our traditional practices. Like what you said, traditional ecological knowledge, as we call it, traditional medicinal practices,
mhm,
having a respect for the earth, for the natural world. That's why a lot of Native groups do have big focuses towards sustainability and eco-friendly practices. I don't know if you've heard of anything about the whole DAPL pipeline issue that was going on in
yeah,
South Dakota for water is life, and us people of the communities up there fighting really hard to protect the water and the natural rivers out there. Obviously for the community to have clean drinking water, but just in general too. I mean, it's
yeah,
water needed, and this was a huge source of water for the entire community and beyond. So, and the fact that nobody even thought about that when they put this proposal in to put this in is pretty kind of shocking. And the fact that it took such a big movement to bring that to people's attention is pretty shocking to me
yeah,
too. That people were just saying, oh, okay, well, we'll pollute something, but it's all right.
just
It's
to make
just,
money.
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
And that's why I'm very dedicated to kind of carrying on our traditional practices in any way I can, or at least educating people about them. from everything from our views, like you said, of nature and the natural world to even how we treat each other as human beings as well. I think that we can offer a lot of insight and a lot of really unique perspectives.
Well, you've been an awesome guest. What's the message that you would wanna leave people? I mean, you've kind of gave a good message, but what's the one thing that you wanna kinda close with that to make sure that people are thinking about?
I guess it would be, I mean, Pride Month has just sort of, I guess, come to an end. But like in my
Yeah,
opinion, I was like, no, Pride, you can be proud every month.
yeah,
I mean, I get that we same with like Black history, Latin history in general, Native history, but like every day is a time to be proud of who you are and proud of what you are, and that is part of you is also your ancestry and your heritage. And for those of us in the Indigenous community, a lot of times that is all that we have. A lot of other things have been taken from us. So our heritage, our tradition, our
mm,
practices, our oral culture, things that have been passed down, even as you've said, hearing stories, word of mouth,
yeah,
generations and generations, is all that we have left in some regard. And so we value that, and we would like others to see the value in that. And we think it can, in a lot of ways, bring insight to how we treat each other and how we treat the world around us and how we interact as human beings. And I think that's particularly true in regard to the LGBTQ plus community. Had to hiccup there. And the whole concept of the True Spirit movement and the fact that that even came out of Indigenous culture
mhm,
only in that sense. This idea of not just accepting people of non-gender conform who are non-gender conforming, or of who are not heterosexual, but embracing them, giving them a platform, a space of their own, letting them have their, we recognize them, we see them, and we embrace them, and we love them. And it can go from either it's not even a thing or it's a big thing and they can be
yeah.
proud of it too. But as long as it's positive, it's good. And I really hope that we at least can convey that message to everybody who is struggling any day with anything that makes them feel that they are not accepted for one reason or another, be it race, be
Awesome.
it sexuality, anything.
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about this, do you have a website or an email or anything that they could get or social media?
My LinkedIn information is, I don't even see, I should.
You know what? You can send it to me email, and I'll put it in the description of the podcast.
Sure. But if people do want to learn more about what is being done in Indigenous culture today, or things like the Two Spirit movement, like
Mhm.
the social justice issues that we face today, and that we're working to fight back against, I would highly recommend going on Indian Collective, NDN Collective. Great website for all of those resources and what you can do to learn more and what you can do to help should you wish to.
That's awesome. You've been an amazing guest. Thank you so much, Natalie, for coming on.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Really
when I got
appreciate.
your, email, I'm like, "Yes." I said, "Yes, yes, yes."
Yeah, I
I
saw
wanted
that.
to talk to you.
Oh, okay. Oh, he's enthusiastic.
Well,
Yeah,
great. You
great.
were an amazing guest. Everybody, please be sure to leave a comment and let us know what you think about the episode, and reach out to Natalie if you have any questions. So, thanks everybody for listening, and it was great having you on, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Zach, for having me. Yep, pop 'em, as we'd say.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye bye.